In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest or most unsettling experience of your life? 15 years old, I had just got home from work, so I went to my bedroom to change out of my work clothes and get ready for bed. I'm in the middle of undressing when I look to my bedroom window to catch my reflection, and I see a man's face. I dropped to the floor and turned off the lights, scrambling to get dressed, still watching the window. The face is gone, but I'm still watching. Then, a freaking camera. No face, just a camera pointed at me sitting on the floor. I bolt from my room and tell my mom and brother. My brother went outside, and our ladder from the backyard was lying there, but nobody around. Couldn't sleep for a year after that, just stared at that window. When I was around 16, my rapidly growing family finally moved from the house I had spent my entire life in. As you would expect, we spent a lot of time fondly remembering things we used to do in the house as we were packing everything up. At some point I decided to go into the downstairs closet with a flashlight and read, something I used to do when I was younger to get some peace and quiet. Now, this is one of those deep closets that goes under the stairs. It went back around 8 feet and then had a left turn into a very low, maybe 3-foot high space. This space was largely occupied by a mountain of old blankets and stuffed animals. Of course, this is the most fluffy spot to sit and read. About an hour in I shift a little to get comfortable and I hear a low, slow, warped, hoarse voice say, "You always make me happy." I flipped my crap, hit my head on the low ceiling, and practically broke the door down getting out. After hyperventilating and explaining to my family why there was no color left on my face, I went back to see what it was. It was my stuffed little bear from when I was 3 or 4 years old that I happened to lean on just right to press his belly. When I pressed his stomach again though, nothing. This poor bear I hadn't played with since I was a toddler used the last of its power, used its dying breath to tell me I made it happy. You make me happy too, little bear, when you're not making me pee myself. When I was a teen I worked at a cable access studio and made mini movies. My neighbors gave me their father's old video camera. They told me he never used it, but it didn't seem to work anymore and had a tape jammed in it. I fixed it up and on the tape was hours of him driving around at night and filming people through their windows. Nothing overly sexual was on it, but there is something unsettling about seeing peeping Tom footage of a guy eating dinner with his family or over 20 minutes of some girls dancing around in their room. I was watching scary movies and I got hungry, so I decided to go out for a late night Taco Bell run. I lived alone at the time, so it was quite a shock as when I opened the door a hand was reaching in after me. I slammed the door on the offending arm and ran and grabbed the butcher knife. After closing all the blinds and sitting in the dark for an hour, I worked up the nerve to look outside. I was shocked to find a bunch of Chinese food menus for a new restaurant scattered all over the ground. That poor Chinese food delivery ghost, doomed to spread the menu around but never get paid. My brother and I were probably about 7 and 5, respectively. We used to wake up every weekend and play computer games before my parents woke up. One day, we turned on the computer and got an eerie message that was directed to us. It said, "Hello Kid A and Kid B, this is your computer talking and I am Alavi. Do not run and tell your parents. They cannot help you now." Turns out my dad had programmed the computer to say that upon startup. This was mid-90s. When I was about 7-8 years old, my family rented a house close to the beach for a week. The drive wasn't very long, but as an 8-year-old, by the time we got there I really had to feed the porcelain stallion a brown bone. We pull into the driveway and are met by a middle-aged woman who owned the house and showed us the place and told us about the town and what to do, etc. My first instinct is to find the bathroom, so I ask and she tells me it's the second door on the right after the kitchen. Go inside and open the bathroom door to an older guy just standing there looking at me. I kinda duck my head down, say sorry, and went back outside. They noticed I was back pretty fast and I told them there was someone in the bathroom already. That's when it got weird. The lady looked at me confused and said there's no one else in the house. I explained that I definitely saw someone in that bathroom. After searching the house we find no evidence of anyone else being there. After a while the lady told us her dad owned the house and lived there and recently passed away. She inherited the house and wasn't sure what to do with it, so she started renting it out. Pretty sure I saw that dude. I was more traumatized by the euphemism, "feed the porcelain stallion a brown bone tbh." I volunteered as an EMT in a small village just outside NYC as a senior in high school and my first few years of college. This night we were on call for not only our town but the surrounding 2 villages, who were out of service. One of the villages isn't exactly the best neighborhood. Now, generally we always have a police officer on every scene we go to just because they can always get there faster. This time around though, in this bordering village, there was a fire on the other side of town and some sort of crime investigation elsewhere. Basically PD resources were stretched thin. A call came in for a 25-year-old male with a facial wound at a private residence with instructions that the patient was in the backyard. We were dispatched and told that there was no PD available and no advanced life support (ALS) available. It was just me and my driver. Note, this is standard in most agencies. It just felt very unnerving for me. So we get on scene and it was an apartment building with an open yard in the back that we could drive onto. My driver pulls onto the field and he sees the patient sitting in the shadows as though he was hiding. Something felt off and that feeling prompted me to hit the floodlights on the ambulance, illuminating most of the yard. The moment the lights came on we saw 5-7 men with tire irons and baseball bats standing in what was once pitch blackness. My driver hit it in reverse and we got the heck out of there. I got on the radio and called for immediate assistance. Turns out those guys were planning on jumping us, stealing the narcotics from the ambulance, and taking the rig for a joyride. Poor planning really, because we don't carry narcotics on a basic life support ambulance. To this day I fear what would have happened if we had just walked up to the patient. I worked at a movie theater selling concessions and this older man approaches the counter and orders. I asked him, would you like anything else, and he looks at me and says, every time I ask for the thing I want they keep telling me it's illegal. I'm quite creeped out by this guy and I just sort of chuckle. He then proceeds to ask me, do you want to know what I ask? Working in concessions, part of the job is making the moviegoers feel welcome, so I say sure, and then what he says to me was the most disturbing thing I have ever heard. He says, you wouldn't have any young girls in the back over there locked up, would you? He said as he's pointing to the closet. He then continued, because that's all I really want, a young girl. I mean, I wish I could just bring them back here and you'd keep them there locked up so I could just pick them up whenever I wanted. I like younger girls, you know. At this point a line had already started forming up behind him and he had still not paid yet, so I told him the total of his order. He then asked me, you understand right? And I didn't know what to say, so I just chuckled and agreed. Then he pulled out a $10 bill, said I like you, put it into the tip jar and walked away. Not to me, but to my sister. Her husband and her had just had their first child a few months prior. My brother-in-law was working the graveyard shift at his job as my sister stayed home taking care of my nephew. Around 2 AM, she heard loud knocking on her back door. She went to go check it out and saw a lady banging on the door asking for my sister to let her in. The lady told my sister that her husband had just beat her down the street and was looking for her. My sister was hesitant to let her in since she had a newborn in the house and didn't want to interfere. She told the lady that the best she could do was call the police for her. The lady told my sister to not call the police and to let her in. This is where my sister got suspicious. She went to get her phone and called 911. When she went back to the door, the lady was gone. The police arrived a few minutes later and they told my sister that the same situation happened a few streets down. Apparently the couple would do this act to get into people's homes. Cop here. I was dispatched to a house at about 1 AM for a prowler. We get there and talk to the residents. Long story short, they saw 2 people wearing masks. One Jason-style hockey mask, don't remember the other, in the yard across the street. It was like 2 weeks past Halloween, so it seemed believable. We check the area and don't see anything. An hour later we get called back. This time we have our dispatcher on the phone with them while we are surrounding the area. We, about 5 of us, are in a perfect position. Dispatch tells us they can still see the prowlers in the next yard. We start to move in. Dispatch says the residents saw the 2 prowlers wave and move into the shed. Guess where I am? That's right, next to the shed. I give verbal commands, bang on the door, and nothing. Frick it, fine, I'll come in after you. Doors open and empty. I even think to check for a trapdoor. Nothing. It is raised about 4 inches, so there isn't even a possibility of a door leading out. Again check the area and find nothing. I talked to the residents. They said as I was moving in on the shed, the 2 put their finger to their lips, giving the SHHHH sign. and then they both waved. They moved into the shed as I was next to it. We went over every possibility trying to come up with an explanation. If the caller was just freaking with us, they had no prior history of it, as in repeated calls for service at the address. I'm not much of a believer in paranormal stuff, but I can still appreciate a situation where I cannot logically explain what just happened. One night, about 10 months ago, there was a pretty heavy snowstorm in my area. All of the roads were closed and a curfew was issued for everybody except emergency medical personnel. I had been shoveling snow for most of the day and was dead tired come nightfall. Didn't have the energy to do much of anything besides eat dinner and lay down. I fire up some OG Star Trek and begin to doze off. A couple of hours later, around 1 AM, I hear the sound of a door rattling and a slight whisper saying my name, Vladimir Wanin. I sit up a bit and realize it's coming from my parents' room, becoming fainter with the passing time. After 10 minutes or so, I gather up the courage to see what the heck is going on. Crappy folding knife in hand, I peek out into the hallway and don't see anything. The noise is still coming from the room next door, the rattling becoming more hushed as I approach. Cautiously, I open the door and sneak inside. It's pitch black and I can't see anything. My eyes are taking entirely too long to adjust to the darkness. I'm shuffling forward, and all of a sudden, something grabs and pulls on my leg. At this point I was so freaked out I jumped back. As the whispers continued, I recognized my dad's voice. He was asking me for help. He had a stroke while walking to use the bathroom around 1 AM that night. After he fell, he was able to use his left foot to rattle the door to his bathroom. My mom fell asleep on the couch in the living room and wasn't around to help or hear. I was able to grab the house phone and call 911, and despite the weather, the police and an ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. That was the scariest night of my life. The doctors told us there wasn't much hope for my dad before going into surgery, since he had a hemorrhagic stroke and there was a massive amount of bleeding. Fast forward 10 months and my old man is cognitively the same, just paralyzed on his right side. He had every infection under the sun while in the hospital, but he staved them off and is still with us today. He was my best friend before the incident, and my hero after. I was visiting my hometown and decided to pick up my old high school friend from his house and take him to dinner and a drink to catch up. He is kinda stressed and tells me that his ex, with whom he had broken up with over 2 years prior, has been stalking him and harassing him. I drive him home afterwards, and it starts to drizzle. As I drop him off at his house, the neighborhood was dark and quiet by now. We both notice a bag tied to my side view mirror. It was likely attached when we were at the restaurant. We open it to see a poorly taken photo of a tree taken at night with flash. There was a brief letter, obviously written from his ex, that said, "I buried our first love letter under this tree years ago. This tree is growing from our love. I made sure my friend got into his house all right and got the heck out of there." When I was 16 in the mid-90s, aka the I know everything, I'm invincible and you can't stop me age, I got in a fight with an acquaintance while a whole bunch of us were hanging out at his house. Stupid fight. Can't remember what about, but I decided frick it, I was going home. I lived about 5 miles away, but I didn't have a car, and since it was 2 AM, there were no buses. I was going to walk home, in the middle of the night, through a not as safe as it seems neighborhood, as a tiny 16-year-old girl, so I did. I think, in hindsight, my friends either didn't believe I was going to do it, or were too startled by the sudden argument to realize what I was doing. I left the house and started hoofing it. About a mile out, the suburban housing neighborhood melted into a main street, with highway access. I started to notice a grayish minivan following me. It would follow me, pass me, turn a corner, and about 3 blocks later, it would do the same thing. I mean, really obvious what it was doing. I crossed over to the other side of the street so I was walking the opposite of traffic flow, and thus no car could come up behind me. It kept doing it, on the other side of the street. About a mile later, there was a 24-hour Fred Meyer West Coast USA chain grocery all-purpose store. Lights bright, but parking lot empty-ish. I immediately crossed the parking lot and went ahead inside. Just before I got to the doors, the minivan that had been following me pulled up into one of the parking spots. A guy called out from the driver's side and said, "I don't want you to walk over here. Just stay there and listen. I just wanted to let you know what I was doing. I saw you walking a while back, but I also saw a dark car that was following you. A couple of times you went to turn around or stopped, so it started following you down a parallel side street. When I saw it, I started to follow you both, just to make sure you were safe. Go inside the store and call someone to come pick you up, please. I haven't seen the car since you headed across the lot. He waited until I was inside the store and then pulled away. I didn't have anyone to call, so I just let the night cashier know what was going on and hung out with her for about an hour and a half. Then I finished the walk home. I've never forgotten the incident or that man, whoever he was. During the walk, I never saw the dark car he mentioned, but I've always been convinced he saved my life that night. Guy in the dark car had seen a suspicious minivan. Was sitting in my room at like 11:30 PM. Heard lots of crap downstairs. Assumed it was my mum. Heard her walk up the stairs to my room. Stop. I called out to her. She didn't say anything and walked downstairs. I went down about a half hour later to find a piece of paper with the words "You're lucky I'm scared too" on it, and a whole bunch of crap was missing. Called mum. She still hadn't arrived home from a dinner she was at with her friends. I called the cops and locked myself in the bathroom, but I think they left when they realized I was still home. Probably the most scared I've ever been when I was hiding in the bathroom. Back when I worked night shift as a security guard, I would experience mild hallucinations due to my poor sleep schedule. I was doing my patrol and I was feeling particularly out of it, so I kept getting those flashes of movement in the corner of my eye. But I was convinced it was just my brain freaking up. At the site I was working, there is a large warehouse filled with chemical waste that has only one light on in it. As I'm going along, I see a pale shape on the ground and quickly recognize it as a body. My adrenaline spikes and I nearly pass out. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a CPR dummy the workers left out for training. This is the goodest flyboy. He will bring you 10 years of happiness in exchange for a like on this video. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.